Hello, listener, and welcome back to the Rural American Surgeon Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Randy Lehman. We're back from essentially summer break. There's a phrase that in life you're juggling certain balls. You're trying to pop. I feel like this a lot. Just pop those balls a little bit to keep them up in the air. And I can poorly juggle up to 3 balls at a time in real life and actual juggling. You have to keep focusing. And what I've been told is that, certain of those balls are glass balls. And if you drop them, they'll break and you can fix them, but sometimes you can't. Sometimes they break to a point that you can't fix them and there will always be cracks and scars and things. Balls like that would be your health can be like that. If you push it too far, that things can't be broken. Your family, possibly your integrity or your reputation. Those are things that you can't pick back up. But your career is a rubber ball. And the Rural American Surgeon is a rubber ball as well. Here I am picking it up. We had a couple weeks off that was just necessary because I've got a lot of other things going on. So just to maintain, here's where we are. One of the things that has happened since the last time that we talked was the death of Charlie Kirk. The podcast episode today on the Money Miniseries is about legacy. Wrapped in with legacy is giving, and it's a Money Miniseries. So yeah, this is about giving of money, but just giving money away is one little piece of what I would consider a bigger topic, which is legacy. I actually went out with a group of kids from my church to the Charlie Kirk Memorial in Phoenix. And there were a few takeaways that I'd like, if you don't mind me sharing. And then I'll spin into money and giving, and I'll leave it up to you to decide what you want your legacy to be, and whether that's something to do with the giving of money or the giving of time or the giving of talents. Those are really the 3 things. And do you want your legacy to have be anything to do with money at all? You're going to leave a legacy of some sort. And you're kind of building that each day. You might want to think about what kind of legacy that is and then be somewhat intentional about that. The first thing that I like to say is something that will show up in the next episode of the Money Miniseries, which is the whole mindset of it wasn't mine to begin with. So there's a simple truth that you feel like you own, like I say, my money, or you say your money or whatever. But the things that you've been given, is it even my family? Is it my health? My whatever. The things, if you made a list of what you're thankful for, quickly, I think any reasonable person can realize they could very quickly be taken away. And there are things outside of your own control that are going to determine that. Yeah, you have a huge influence on that, but you're ultimately just a steward of your relationships with your family, your health, your job, your money. If you have a position of any kind of authority or anything that you have, it's something that you're a steward of. The idea that it's not yours to begin with is sort of an underlying truth that you have to believe in order to sort of understand my perspective on all of on legacy and on giving. I'll talk about that starting with the word tithe. So there's your little teaser. But first, let's talk about Charlie Kirk, because Charlie Kirk is a Christian martyr, and he was asked what he wanted to be remembered for, and he said he wanted to be remembered for courage for his faith above all else. And so that's a legacy. And you see how that has nothing to do necessarily with money. And I would say that I feel motivated, especially now more than ever, to encourage you, the listener, to think about your legacy from a similar lens and impact that you have on the world from a utilitarian perspective, such as the amount of good that you can do for the world, amount of pain and suffering that you can relieve for the world. That is not a bad thing to do. And I do that myself. But I think that the poor will be with you always, and pain and suffering will also always be here. And it's like playing whack-a-mole, trying to make the world better. The world definitely is better. I mean, I see objectively, I say definitely, right? But then I hesitate for where I was going to go with this is the influence of America in the history of the world, right? There's never been a better time to be alive objectively in terms of safety, food availability, opportunity, freedom, right? And especially in the country of America, there's never been a better time or place to be alive. I think that was a core thing that Charlie Kirk tried to convince young people whose minds are being poisoned by ideas that America's bad. I mean, that couldn't be further from the truth. It's a tremendous country, and it remains so, and it has influenced, and it has elevated a rising tide, lifting all ships. It's elevated the entire world and changed. The irony of the No Kings Day. That's what America is literally founded on: is no kings, and we do not have a king. And because America doesn't have a king, many, many, many other nations now also don't have a king, and that. The idea of free markets allowing the individual to pursue meaningful things for themselves and to own property, those core foundational beliefs of America have, again, from a utilitarian perspective, lifted the entire world into times of new prosperity not known before. Then I hesitate because there's still problems, right, that come along with that. And I think the ultimate issue is that we live in a fallen world that was created to reflect its creator, but rejected its creator. And that led to pain and suffering. And so reconciliation with the creator is ultimately the main thing, we'll say, worth pursuing. And without that, everything else is meaningless. That's kind of it in a nutshell for me. And the last thing I want to say about Charlie Kirk before getting back into the tithe thing is being there. It was the most interesting thing to me was watching that memorial service, and everybody had 5 minutes to talk. And in their 5 minute, I know this because I was watching the video and it shows from the back, the person, they got this little 5 minute counter in front of them. So like it's counting down, and your time's, you're going to get the hook if you can't wrap it up. So you got to see so many different, mostly well articulated people, smart people that knew Charlie Kirk well, sharing their little 5 minute thing. Is different than like a normal, funeral service, for example. And there were two ways that the speaker approached their commentary. The one person approached it from a very reasonable, very logical, fair perspective. And they said things like justice will be served on the assassin, and other things like the people that did this and the ones that condone this, they are nothing. They are everything that's wrong with the world and the opposite of beauty, right? Heard somebody say things like that. That was contrasted, and funny, it was contrasted almost back to back to back with a totally different worldview that one speaker said, who was like a Christian apologetics guy and was a mentor of Charlie Kirk, specifically in the realm of, I would say, geology and history of creation, that sort of field. He said that Charlie Kirk, taken too soon, sure, but he's in heaven. And Charlie Kirk is not in heaven. And this is totally paraphrased, so go watch the original thing. But basically, this is my take on it, okay? Charlie Kirk's not in heaven because he was an excellent husband and a caring, loving father, though he might have been. Charlie Kirk is not in heaven because he mobilized millions of voters for Donald Trump, though he did. Charlie Kirk is not in heaven for, maybe we'll say, the tithes that he gave and the money that he gave, right, throughout his life. And ultimately, Charlie Kirk's not in heaven even because Charlie Kirk gave his life for his Savior. But Charlie Kirk's in heaven because his Savior gave his life for Charlie Kirk. And that one really impacted me because we're talking about management of our money, right? Our stuff. It's not yours. It's not mine. It's not ours. We're just stewards. Let's try to make smart decisions. Let's think about it. Sure, let's spend a little energy doing that. But let's not forget the gravity of the real situation. And we're all just dust, little pieces of carbon just happen to be put together because thank goodness somebody took the time to write the code for our lives in DNA. And it's put together and held together for a short period of time until we're going back to dust again. But why is it that I know and understand that, and I'm perfectly positioned on this rock, just the right amount of space from the sun with the atmosphere that, sustains life, and animals not the same as humans, acting off of instinct, whereas the humans have this understanding. And there's a document that's been written by, I don't know how many, but, like dozens of writers over millennia that's been put together and preserved. And it's got unique little things like the 117th chapter is the shortest one and the 119th is the longest one and the 118th is the middle one, right? And there's little nuggets of truth hidden in there. And, 117, is maybe a reference to first month, 17th day, 3 days after Passover, the day that time stopped and reset, and Jesus Christ rose from the dead for your sins to save you. And at that level, without having an understanding of that, then what's the point of anything else? What's the point of like chasing an extra million? It doesn't matter that much. It can be fun to do that. Do it, save and invest and understand the value of these things and pass those lessons on to your kids. But again, my first episode was what's the point? And I'm doing it again. But especially in a episode about legacy, we should consider that topic. And then the last thing I'll say is the very last two speakers at Charlie Kirk's memorial, right? Charlie Kirk's wife, Erica Kirk, and President Trump. You have the same exact thing on display again. And maybe I didn't say it well enough the first time, but the one speaker is looking for revenge, kind of justice, very reasonable. But the other speaker is looking for something totally different. And really, it was epitomized by Erica Kirk on national, really international television, publicly forgiving her husband's assassin. So that's the other alternative. A message, and the same speaker that said why Charlie Kirk is essentially in heaven said that at the end of your life, you're going to have two things. You're going to get justice or you're going to get mercy. And that's really the contrast that I saw from person to person, is someone looking for justice and another person offering and hoping for mercy, not just for themselves, but for others. And then President Trump stands up and he says, I don't know how she did that or how she does that. And he goes, because I hate my enemies. And that was his word for word what he said. And President Trump's this close. And I thought it was wonderful that President Trump, many other leaders, even Elon Musk could sit there and watch the same show that I watched. And if you haven't seen the whole entire thing, like I would recommend blocking out like 4 or 5 hours and go watch that whole thing because it was quite the show. A lot of what Charlie Kirk, I think, stood for and wanted to show was there. And also, watch a little bit of what he said if you haven't, because he's one of the most logical, easy to listen to people and speaks truth in a world that is really twisting the truth and telling half-truths and a lot of lies. And so, to President Trump, well, how is it? How is it that she can do that? Because it's very natural to hate your enemies like most people do. And so he said, I don't know how she does that. Well, she straight up told you how she does it. It's due to somebody giving her mercy when she didn't deserve it. And now she's trying to follow that person's example and share it to others. That's it. And so I hope that, President Trump could also put that together at some point. That'd be great. But each person kind of has to make that decision, for themselves. And so, justice or mercy. And when you're talking legacy, it matters to think about how your money's going to be, but it also matters on the other components of legacy, like what essentially you could phrase it as, what do you want to be remembered for? So about that, I'm going to talk about giving money here for a few minutes and then close up. So tithing literally means a tenth. So many traditions teach giving a tenth. The Jewish tradition taught to tithe and give a tenth. The deeper lesson isn't really the number, it's the posture. So why? What's the point? So how I practically do this is I have direct deposit from whenever I'm taking money, I deposit. So like in my business, the money comes into my business and then I get paid out of my business. Or if you have a job, I had it the same way when I had a job. When the money comes to the account that I'm going to spend out of and live out of, 10% goes to another account that I never see. And I feel that, and I've had conversations with this with people up and down the spectrum. So you have people that are making $1 million a year that are spending $1 million a year, and they couldn't imagine putting away 10% for savings, right? Or giving away $100,000. They couldn't imagine that, right? But yet you have other people that are making much less than $100,000 to begin with. That dollar amount that could be obviously they could live off 900, right? Those other folks, are living off much, much less. So I had a conversation and I used, there was large periods of my life where I was a student and then I was a resident, and I didn't necessarily come from money. I didn't want really much during my life. Came from maybe it's average, maybe it's less than average upbringing, but regardless, I can relate to somebody who's making $30,000 a year. But if somebody's making $30,000 a year, there's another person that's making 27. Okay. You can always imagine a 80% or 90% of what you make. And how would you have to live if you lived off 80% or 90% of what you currently make? And so my argument is that no matter what, you can always afford as a percentage, 10% to go to savings and investing and long-term investing. And if you do that, then you have a very high chance of being able to buy your own freedom over a period in the United States with reasonable investments of maybe 30 years, like a lifetime of work. If you want to get there sooner, say 50% and live off less and don't need so much when you call it quits from standard working or whatever. But we've already talked about that. And you also can give 10% away completely and survive, right? And so when I say it's not about the number, it's about the posture, what does the 10% do? Living off that 90% and giving away the first portion is because it reminds you that it's not yours to begin with. And it shows you that you didn't need it, because otherwise you could end up making $500,000 a year and you feel like you need it all to survive and you earned it all. But really, you've been given something, whether it's income or ability or opportunity. And so part of your job is to give it away before you live on it all. And that's what helps you to stay free. And again, freedom being like one of our first values. How can giving away money make you more free? It does, because it's a mental state and it's a thought process more that traps you in the 21st century, especially if you're a surgeon listening to this podcast, than like real, shackles or anything like that. Helps you to remember the source. And then the giving becomes a joy and not a burden. Like I do that and it goes into an account. And so now I can use that money and I have it at my availability for when opportunities come up. And the nice thing is in the United States, you have a lot of tax advantage ways to give away money. So one thing, if you want to be super nerded out and maximizing on it, is you can start a donor advised fund, which I have done. And a donor advised fund is kind of, you can think of it as like a retirement account, but for charity, meaning that you can put money in there and you can buy securities like stocks and bonds, and the money can grow tax free. And then you can use the money whenever you want to to donate to a charity. So like it has to be like a 501c3 charity, that is actually registered. So the problem with that is you can't, like, somebody's in need right in front of you that of, their house burned down, somebody dies, you want to give money to their family, you want to support, somebody that is going through something. You can't just do that out of your donor advised fund, but I would suggest that you give all of your giving money into the donor advised fund, right? You can give it out of your other account, but a lot of money can go through, and it's wise because first off, when tithing was set up, to my understanding, taxes were not at a percentage level as they currently are in the United States. And so a lot of the tithing money actually went to like festivals and things for the group. And so there's an argument for, we don't need to tithe because now we pay our taxes, which then leads to charitable things. And I think that's total baloney. And I explained to you why, no matter how much you make, having a fixed amount that comes off the top to begin with is good. I'm not saying that you should 100% have to go spend all the rest of it now either. I mean, certainly I am giving away more than 10% overall of the money that I make. Even my tax returns show that, and I just can feel myself living with a more generous lifestyle than that. But it starts probably with 10%. And maybe, that's something that you can say anybody, I believe, could do, and probably should do. But, you make that decision for yourself. Obviously, you're not going to make a mandate on it because then that eliminates the issue of the heart. But how can you actually give that money away? So you could set up a donor advised fund if you wanted to. If you didn't have a use for it, your money can grow tax advantaged, and then you can give it to a 501c3 when you find the thing that you want to support. Other ways that I've practically done it is I actually donated a Thompson retractor to my hospital one year. Like, if you might find that's a very specific thing, right? Who would do that besides a surgeon, right? That understands that there's a need. It's even sort of a mutually beneficial need. It helps me out because it's something that I need, but I couldn't get the hospital to buy it. They couldn't come up with the funds to buy it. So I donate to the auxiliary. The auxiliary buys the piece of equipment. I don't remember how I did it. I don't think I called it a business expense because it was a donation. So we do it as a donation. And I think that you can, I don't want to say this wrong, but I think it's 60% of your AGI or something like that you can give away. Obviously, talk to your accountant about that. In fact, check me on that one. When you're driving your AGI down to very low levels, be careful because you don't want to drive it down too low and then not be able to take your charitable contributions. But this all goes into your overall tax planning, strategy. But that's just a practical example of it's hard to do that if you're not planning ahead and just like if you don't have a pot of money that you're ready to, to disperse. I've also donated land to a charitable organization that kind of came with my clinic, and I wasn't using it, but obviously it's to give it away. That means you're giving away all the potential future uses of it. So it's very meaningful, right? But I've done that. So that's an interesting way to do it. I've sponsored a bunch of local teams and community causes. Each of these isn't about, like I said, the deduction, right? Or the advertising, if you will, the marketing of having my businesses or my personal name out there. Although don't ignore the value of the tax advantage giving and don't ignore the value of the other stuff. But it's about like building my community, which is what I'm all about, honoring my town, leveraging the things that I've been given. And so then there can be these interesting things that only you know about this opportunity. And it's a unique to you giving opportunity. And I guess I would encourage you to exploit those opportunities. It's not about like, and I give of course, to my church and stuff too, but it's not about just like by the numbers, take 10% of my income, donate it to my church, wash my hands of it. You're missing the joy and the real value of like giving and legacy when you do that. The other two types of giving are giving your time and your talents besides your money. And so for me, the big one is surgical mission trips. You can also include like charitable work in the United States. or even just taking the extra time to explain to somebody when it's not the most efficient thing to do. Being a good doctor for people here, but like for me, I don't have to do free care in the United States because all the contracts that I have written up, the hospital is already providing a certain amount of free care, but they're actually going to pay me on a work RVU basis. And so I can actually do the free care. It is free for the patient. The hospital kind of eats it and they still pay me for it. So that just happened. It's probably not going to be like that. Maybe it will be in like 20 or 25 years, but how it happens to be in 2025 in Indiana, okay, is that I can basically do the free care without doing it for free. But that's not so internationally. It's not so in the whole world. And so I've been doing surgical mission trips. It converges something that I'm good at, which is like surgery, team leadership, and what I love, which is serving, meeting new people, stretching myself. And I go because I want to give my skills, but I always come back changed. And that's legacy in action, right? It's giving while living. Doesn't mean you wait until you made it to give. Where you are, whatever you've got, you give right now. And it becomes personal, to you. And so what is that talent? Whether it's a musical talent or a literary talent or a talent of listening or, and I've also heard, when you're young, there's three resources. There's money, there's time, and there's energy. Pick two. So when you're young, you have time and energy, but no money. And when you're middle-aged, which I'm approaching, you have money and you have energy, but no time. And I feel that. And when you're old, you have time again, you have money possibly, but you have no energy. And I told that to my grandpa, and he just, every time I get him laughing, I'm like, oh, Jesus, is this the end? Because, he just gets laughing and then he gets coughing. But that one really got him, which means there must be an element of truth to it. So you're going to have what you have at the time and make of it what you can. Finally, I'd just like to turn it back kind of to you and say, what are you gifted at? And what do you love doing? Maybe it's counseling, mentoring, entrepreneurship. Maybe it's farming like me. That's your channel. Okay. And I would encourage you to have a direct deposit. Okay. Because that's nice to take it off the top. You don't feel it. And then all of a sudden, boom, you got 70 grand in an account that needs to be given. And then make sure that you don't do the Ananias and Sapphira thing and dip into that for your personal money. But put it to action. And then what will happen is you probably get addicted to it and you'll love it because you realize money spent for others and helping others is way more memorable for not just others, but you than money spent for yourself. So choose a regular cadence and put something into action. And then the third thing, after just kind of identifying for you, doing some sort of regular cadence, but the third thing is document it and pass it on. And so do it intentionally. Talk with your spouse or your partner, talk to your kids, model it for your kids, and write down your values and share that so that for yourself, but also the people that you care about and that are around you know it as well. So give something away. It could be money, could be your time, could be your talent, but do it with the belief what I have isn't just for me. In doing so, you're building a legacy. I was here. I used what I was given. And I gave it away. I left it out there. Those are my thoughts about legacy. And I really appreciate you being here and thanks for listening along and sharing in our journey. It's an interesting and fun time to be alive. Church attendance is up 15% in the last month since Charlie Kirk's passing. There's revival happening across the United States. I wonder why that might be. It's interesting. I would say worthwhile to open your eyes and pay attention to it a little bit. It's a great time to be bold and to share your belief, and then ultimately to share what's been given with you with others as part of your giving and your legacy. So Thank you very much for listening to this episode about legacy and giving on the Rural American Surgeon. And I will see you on the next episode of the show.